So the other weekend, I attended this really cool Viking workshop with Norse Dragon Armoury, which I 10 out of 10 recommend going along to. It's really reasonably priced and a lot of great fun. You get a lot of great shots from it. And I'll pop all the links to those down below so you can check them out. But I just wanted to show you guys my sort of editing process for portraits, particularly sort of like a fine art style portrait. I'm not going into the individual processes that I do. I'm just giving you a sort of a vague overview of the kind of things that I focus on when I'm editing portraits. So hopefully you find it helpful. If you would like me to go into more detail on any of the particular things, then feel free to let me know in the comments and I will see about putting tutorials together for the individual things. But yeah, let's get into it. So I've got the image here, and the first thing I like to do is to just adjust the composition. She's a little bit off center and I would quite like her to be centered in this shot, so I'm going to start off by cropping the image. Now, I don't tend to worry if there's like a little white bar on the side, because 9 times out of 10 you can use the fill tool very efficiently to help with that. I am concerned that a little bit of her arm guard is not going to be rendered properly, so what I've done is I've taken another photo that I've used that was a little bit wider and just basically sliced that in there, copied and pasted it over, adjusted the size, tweaked it a little bit just to make sure that it matches, and then just sort of layer mask it off, and no one should really know. It's a cheeky little trick that I like to do. A lot of my photos are sort of composites of like the best bit of a bunch of photos that I took anyway, so that's one of my little secrets. And you just take a little bit of time on it and boom, you've got the composition sorted. So my next step is to use frequency separation just to remove some of these stray strands of hair that are just sort of being a little bit distracting. The way I sort of look at these kind of images is any detail that distracts my eye, I get rid of. If it doesn't add to the image of the story, if it's taking away from anything, it's gone, it's getting edited out. I'm not a photojournalist, I'm a fine artist, so having that kind of accuracy isn't important. It's about creating a beautiful image, so that's my priority. If you don't know what frequency separation is, it's basically like a skin touch-up tool. I'm not going to explain how to do it in this video because there's plenty of tutorials out there, and I just wanted to give you more of a vague sort of feel of how I go about editing portraits rather than teaching you the individual methods. So I just get rid of all these little stray strands of hair over the face that are just being a little bit distracting. Then I move on to this strand of hair, which just really catches my eye. I think it's because it runs horizontally against the sort of the rest of the hair and it's quite thick. Now, frequency separation just isn't going to fix this one. So I'm basically just going to have to digitally paint it out. Now, I use a graphics pad and a selection of brushes to just paint it out, and there's no quick way of doing it. You've just got to basically paint it in strand by strand until it blends in. Now, this took me probably the best part of 10-15 minutes, so I'm just going to sort of skip ahead, but hopefully you get the basic idea of how I would go about getting rid of these strands of hair. And I would do this to any sort of strands of hair that, like I said, look particularly messy and distract the eye. Right, so the next step is, again, focusing in on the hair. There's a lot of sort of flyaways, which, again, just look very messy, don't really make the image look that aesthetic. So using the clone stamp tool on a separate layer, I just basically repaint in the background over these stray hairs. And luckily, with it being such a bokeh sort of image, you can get away with being quite crude with this. If it was a little bit more detailed, I would probably have to digitally paint it. But luckily, I can be pretty sort of loose with this and just sort of recreate the basic kind of feel of the image, and then just use a layer mask just to sort of paint in a few of the hairs back, but because you don't want like a solid edge where the hair meets, because that doesn't look natural, but you don't want it to be as messy as it often is either, so this is just a nice little way just to neaten up the hair just a little bit. And then the next thing I do is focus on some dodging and burning, which I find just helps make the image just really sort of pop. I always paint in like a shadow under the chin just to help make the face stand out a little bit. I will paint some highlights into the eyes to make those stand out a little bit. Work into individual strands of hair just to make them stand out. And it's just a really good way of making a portrait just look so much better. It's really easy to do. Again, I'm not going to explain the process of how to do dodge and burn. There's plenty of tutorials out there.
but that's usually like the next phase of editing a portrait. Now on this particular image, I've taken some time just to recolor her eyes, because the Lightroom preset that I used dulled down the colours of her eyes, and she had such beautiful eyes that I didn't want to lose that colour. So just using a separate layer and a colour blend mode, I've just repainted the colours into her eyes nice and easily. I've also, with a white brush, just highlighted the catch lights just a little bit more, just to make sure her eyes pop as much as possible. And next up, I'm just going to finish off touching up the skin, because I didn't do that earlier. I was just removing the stray hairs. A lot of the time I will use the frequency separation to properly touch up the skin, but I don't really feel the need to in this image. She's got pretty flawless skin anyway, and you've got all the blood spatter as well, so having more texture actually works for this image, and I'm happy to work with it. But there's just a few little blemishes that I've just touched up here. And then the final step is probably the bit that takes the longest, which is the colour grading. I always prefer to colour grade in Photoshop for the most part. I will start off in Lightroom, I'll apply a quick preset just to sort of set the tone and the mood of the image, but Photoshop really allows you to just be really, really precise with the arrangement of the colours. Using your adjustment layers and stuff, like you've got the colour adjustment layer, you've got hue saturation, you've got your curves, and because you can layer mask them all and stuff, you can really, really just make the image just look so much more rounded. It creates a lot more depth, and I personally feel it just looks a lot more professional, a lot more sort of cinematic in style than when you run it through just Lightroom by itself. I don't feel like Lightroom gives you the same kind of control over your use of colour as Photoshop does. Now this probably took me the best part of 20 minutes, so again I'm just going to sort of speed through this part of the process. It's just about creating the layers, playing around with them, adjusting the blending modes of them and stuff, until you create the look that you're really sort of going for. And you can play around with this quite a lot. That's the fun of colour grading. You can really sort of play around with the mood and the feel of the image just by changing up the colours a little bit. And if you like the Lightroom dialog, you can just go to Filter and select Camera Raw Filter, and it opens up the whole sort of pretty much the same thing that you find in Lightroom anyway with the sliders. And I will often use this in tandem with the colour adjustments as well, and I just find it gives it a really nice sort of rounded finish.
Okay, so I hope you found that helpful. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, let me know in the comments of what I could improve. Like I said, if there's anything that you'd like me to expand on and maybe do a tutorial on, let me know in the comments and I will see about making that for you. And be sure to follow me on all my social media, my Instagram, Twitter, be subscribed to my YouTube channel. It's @James Lind across the board. So, see you on the next one.